Hi everyone, and welcome to the third in CEP series of PD Online for 2024. Very excited about our program that we have today. I'll just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'll just remind everyone of a few housekeeping matters. Today's session is being recorded. A large number of participants choose to watch the recording afterwards, so it could end up anywhere. Feel free to put questions in the chat box, and there will be a survey that comes in the chat box around 4:50 the opportunity for you to give feedback to us, which we always welcome. 5 o'clock on the dot. I've got a big red Simon's gong ready to go here. We finish right on 5 and we're done. And I will encourage, if you're new, to have a look at the previous 2 episodes for this year and even any of last year's. Great way to spend Easter and the upcoming Victorian school holidays to have a look. So, without further ado, because our first speaker, I know, has to return to a meeting, we have the chair of CEP with us for the first time today. We're very excited. Because today's topic, a large part of it is around alternative settings. CEP does have a paper on alternative settings, and it is an area of passion for our current chair. So I'll welcome our chair, Peter Greenwell, to say a few words on behalf of CEP. Peter?
So thanks very much, Mark. And I'll just explain a little bit of the background. About 5 years ago, there was a significant look at education in rural Victoria by an expert panel chaired by our current Deputy Secretary, David Howes. He came up with a lot of recommendations, but one of the recommendations was around plans for alternative settings in regional centres. Now, we've had alternative settings across Victoria for a long time, but they've grown really from the ground up. There's never been a systematic planning for alternative settings. And so this recommendation was something that was new and had a lot of possibilities associated with it. 2019, we also saw COVID. And so while some things came out of that report, this particular recommendation, which was accepted by the Minister, was then shelved. So we decided, given the feedback we were getting from schools about the challenges they were facing post-COVID, particularly with students not coming to school and with challenging behaviours from students at school. And so we had a look at it and we thought we really need to do something about it. We had spent a bit of time putting together a paper and it was really just a one-pager. And it was talking about the particular challenges that rural students face in getting access if they're not attending school or if their behaviour means that they face real challenges being at school. We called it a second chance for rural students because in many towns there's only one school and in some towns there's only a P12 college. In metropolitan Melbourne it's different. If things go wrong, there's plenty of other schools where you can get a second chance. The other challenges are many of the schools in rural Victoria are small, their wellbeing teams are small, and the range of community resources available to support students' wellbeing is pretty limited as well. So we thought it was a real priority for rural Victoria. So our paper talked about second chances, it talked about the priority for rural Victoria, and it talked about a systemic approach, that is, every student having access, both primary and secondary, networking approaches, high quality provision, making sure that every child had the opportunity to get the second chance that was required for them in rural Victoria. We put that to Minister Hutchins and we put it to the department. And Minister Hutchins, before she finished, said, "We accept what you're saying. We think there needs to be a review and we're going to instigate that review." So last year that review began. It became within the department. So unlike many other reviews of alternative settings, it was actually done internally to the department. And it had an external support person. John Firth was the strategic advisor to the review. John had been the strategic advisor to the review of the senior schooling options, which produced the significant reform program we're seeing at the senior end of the school now. We were lucky we were able to be represented on the expert advisory group. That review did a lot of work. It went to a lot of different settings. It had a look at what was happening on the ground. It talked to a lot of people. And as a result of that, they put a set of recommendations to the Minister. They haven't shared those recommendations, but and we're hopeful that there'll be an outcome from the Minister in the near future. But what I think we're likely to see is a paradigm shift from alternative settings being homegrown, sprouting up in areas where people see have an interest and see the need, to alternative settings being planned by the department as part of the ordinary provision that every student should have access to. We see that as a really positive thing. We're hopeful that that's the way it will go. We see that as a really positive outcome, and we see it as something that will be great for students in rural Victoria. So from a CEP perspective, we think we've been able to build on the back of the expert panel report, build on the back of, I think, the extremities that we saw out of COVID, and really identify for government the need to do something important in this area. Thanks, Mark. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Peter, and a privilege to have you here today and in the role. Much appreciated.
Sorry, I'm going to have to go.
Yes, no worries. So the paper we spoke of, position paper on alternative settings, is one of a number of position papers that will be released on the CEP website from April. So we're looking forward to that. Before I pass over to today's presenter, facilitator, a quick hello from our key speakers today. So we have Brett Pedlow from Trafalgar College. Hi, Brett. Formerly of Yarram, and you would have had a bit of rain down your way this morning since I drove past. Yep, very good. All the way from South Australia, St Joseph's School in Clare, we have Peter Shearer.
Hey Mark, how are you?
Good to see you, Peter. And from Australian Schools Plus to finish off today, we have Liz Henderson. Great to have you on board. Wonderful. Without further ado, I shall pass over to CEP's Morris Billy, who will be the facilitator for today's session. Thank you, Morris.
Thanks, Mark, and welcome everybody to an area of real interest for me, having spent many years doing youth work in schools in a number of different locations and having lots and lots of conversations around alternative settings and programs for disadvantaged or disengaged young people. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our guests today. As you mentioned, we have Brett, Peter and Liz, and we'll be hearing from them in just a moment. Brett, you're going to be our first cab off the rank, and from down in Trafalgar, and I just want to say that I visited the school a few weeks ago as part of our work with our ambassadors program and was made to feel very welcome and really loved the look of the school and the way that the students looked out for each other and the work of the staff there. So thank you for that. And I think you're going to be talking about our flexible learning options space and some of the work that you've been doing there. So Brett, without further ado, I'll hand over to you to share your knowledge and interest with us.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, Morris. So I've been, thank you, Maddie, for picking that up. Okay, so I'm currently the principal at Trafalgar High School, but prior to this position, I held the principal position at Yarram Secondary College, where I set up an alternative setting, a separate campus there. And prior to that, I set up the Flow campus in Moore. So I've had experience setting up two alternative settings that were quite different. And I suppose that is a large part of my presentation today, is to sort of go through the process that I followed. As part of the review process that Peter spoke about, I actually sat on the panel as well when the department was setting up the parameters around, I suppose, accountability. And certainly they looked at 4 or 5 key alternative settings across the state as part of that. And LV Flow in Moore, which I'll firstly talk about, was one of those. So this slide here, and it's a fairly simple slide deck that I've got. There's only 4 slides that I'm going to show, but I hope it does encapsulate other work that I've been involved in, but also to just sort of put some parameters around alternative settings, and I think some key parts to it. So the first one here being know your community and what is required. So when we set up LV Flow in Morwell, it was about 12 years ago, and there was a real gap in provision in that year 7 to 10 space. In Latrobe Valley, there's a lot of domestic violence, generational poverty, etc. However, there was a huge gap in provision. So the primary schools had programs they would run. There's a big TAFE sector. There's a few sort of community VCAL type approaches, but it was in that year 7 to 10 area. So we really identified in the project work that we did that was our space that we needed to sort of look in, and that's where the gap was, and that's where the disengagement was largely happening with youth in the area at that time. The flip of that was I then went to Yarram Secondary College, which is about an hour from anywhere for those that know, and Damien, it's good to see you on the screen there today. But Yarram's really an hour from anywhere. So the gap in provision in Yarram was largely in that 15, 16-year-old to 21-year-old up bracket. So we really identified that was the area where we had to sort of focus. So a student would disengage in year 9 or year 10, and there was no TAFE in Yarram. There was no sort of community VCAL. There was no sort of workforce support. So two very different settings, but really it came back to knowing what the community sort of needed. So I'll go to the next slide if I can. This is really important, and this is something where Peter alluded there to the majority of alternative settings around the state have sort of just grown organically, okay? They've sort of grown from this has been here, it's morphed into this, it's ended up as this. I think that's where some mistakes can be made in this space, because there are so many, but in one style does not fit all. And so before setting up LV Flow, I think I went to about 15 different settings around the state, from Warrnambool to Ballarat to multiple options around metropolitan Melbourne. And we really identified the model. And you might know Oakwood, which is the base has about 6 or 7 campuses, or there used to be, around sort of outer eastern. And that was a program that was very individualised and would work for that 7 to 10 cohort. Now that probably wouldn't work for the older cohort or the younger ones, but for that year 7 to year 10 cohort, having a shorter amount of time, 2 to 3 hours, having it very individualised, and all students were to focus on that worked a treat for those kids. Flip of that was, down in Yarram, that wasn't going to work. So we really needed to look at how could we support these young people to re-engage in some form of education, some form of training or employment, but then skill them up for the workforce. So once again, we spent about 3 to 6 months doing some research around what the gaps were and how we could support them. Once again, we did a lot of trips around it. I know that's hard, but you can really get some bang for your buck by doing that. And I think that was a real key to the success of both those settings, was knowing what was out there. I think you need to go to some settings that aren't necessarily performing terribly well as well, because then you can sort of learn from what's not working and you can sort of see that. So I'd be suggesting don't jump into it. Take your time. How I did things, I think, is quite different to what Peter just spoke about, and it being centrally driven from the department. However, a lot of the premises are the same, and by doing your research is largely, I think, what is being alluded to there. Next slide, thanks, Smitty. Okay, this was crucially important as well in the establishment of both the alternative settings that I was involved in. So the partnerships and pathways. So in the establishment of LV Flow in Morwell, it was a true partnership between the 3 Latrobe Valley colleges, being Kernai College, Trafalgar College and Moana College. Now, we established that from the start with an MOU, which created buy-in from all of those 3 schools. Very often, an alternative setting will become a dumping ground for kids who just aren't fitting into mainstream school. All right. Now, if that is the view of the schools and they haven't got buy-in, that's what will happen. But by having a true partnership and buying, we had a steering committee or a board of management, you know, we've had some real clear parameters around data and what were we trying to achieve. That was all set up prior in that partnership with the colleges. When I talk about partnerships as well, is an alternative setting will usually have students that have probably half a dozen barriers to education. That might be having an unstable home. It might be having a disability of some form. It could be domestic violence in the house. It could be drugs, alcohol, substance abuse. It could be out of home care, just having to live. It could be all of them, and it probably often is. So an alternative setting will often have the most vulnerable students there, and the trap can be that you have to be everything to everyone. That can't be the case, and that's unsustainable under the funding models that we have in our schools. So the partnerships are the key. So that's where we need to engage with our community services. We need to have true partnerships with them. In Latrobe Valley, we're really strong with Quantum, Anglicare and Orange Door now. You know, we really work quite closely with Berry Street as well, because we knew that we could not support all of our students with all the needs they have. Now that takes time again. That takes time, it takes relationships, and it takes goodwill. But generally, we're all working with the same kids here. You know, they're all involved in these services. So why are we working in separate silos? The other one is pathways. And a big issue that happens with alternative settings, and in all the review stuff that I was involved in across the state, was an alternative setting cannot be a destination. The minute it becomes a destination, that is when these young people will, and yet they'll engage for a while, it'll go well, but that's not going to be their school forever. Now, it needs to be pathways, and pathways can hopefully be back into mainstream education. We know that's not going to happen for the vast majority of our kids, but it needs to be into something else. It could be training, it could be employment, it could be a mix of both, but it needs to have that underpinning, and whether it's a year 7 to 9 program, a primary school program, or a senior VCAL type, like a community VCAL, has to be pathways. You've got to be looking at what's next, because there needs to be those tangibles for those young people to look to engage. On my last slide there, thanks, Paddy. Okay, this is one where I'm glad that we're here, Mark, as opposed to in a department briefing, because this is probably what could have and should have got me in a bit of trouble over the time. But really, working in this alternative space, we need to be working in the grey at times. We need to be finding loopholes, because really, in order to get some baseline data and to set up an alternative setting, it's great for the department to say as part of this review that there is a thirst for it, but that's not always the case. But we know that we need to support our most vulnerable kids. So at times, we are going to need to set up quasi programs on the edge of our schools. We are going to need to utilise some spaces that are outside the mainstream setting. Now, if we were to follow the exact letter to the law the whole time in our job, we would very rarely get the outcomes that we need to achieve for these young people. So I know that there's been alternative settings that have been firstly established in footy clubs and in regional areas. What's one spot that is vacant pretty much from Monday to Friday? It's the local rec reserve. Now, does that fall under the VRQA? No, of course it doesn't. But there's some things that can be done. There's partnerships that can be utilised to be able to run programs in those spots, whether it's through the LEN, it's through other community services. You then need to have programs that you can run within your school site that sit separate to your mainstream programs. And at times it is having flexible timetables. Now, I know that we're moving away from that as a system. We're having to justify it. However, a student coming half a day a week for 3 days, if they haven't been at school for 12 months, is a hell of a lot better than them not coming at all. So it's working in the grey, and it is working with those young people and the families or the carers or whoever it is in that space to try and get some outcomes in order to get some baseline data to hopefully then, and as I have with both LV Flow and with the Devon North campus at Yarra, end up getting full VRQA approval, and they're now legitimate campuses. So I hope I didn't bore you too much there. I didn't want to go into a huge amount of detail, but just give some overview of sort of what I've done and been fortunate to do. The one thing that I will say as well, just in closing, is working in the alternative setting space, your people are your key. You know, our staff are generally the case, but it takes really, I think, you know, this has been exacerbated after COVID in all schools, but geez, if you invest in your staff and your people and you get the right ones, you're a hell of a lot more chance of being successful. And for me, I hope that was okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, that was really interesting, and thanks for sharing your thoughts and insights there. I think you've got to duck off. Just had a quick question, which sort of goes with what I think was just put in the chat box about, and you sort of touched on it, about staffing and the passionate of staff. But in my travels around, there's always been the conversations around the challenges around funding, resourcing, and staffing. And often the three are meshed together. Have you got just a bit of advice in that space about how some of those challenges can be met, and if that came across your table, what you sort of used in that space?
Yeah, and it's pretty ballsy, Morris, to sort of set these up, because you probably need to front end it funding-wise. Now, the analogy is probably not the greatest, but it's true. If you run a gym and you get all your members, you might have 500 members at your gym. If they all come between 6 o'clock and 7:30 at night, there's no way you can run your gym. If you have an alternative setting, if you've got an enrollment of 40 kids, if they all come all day, every day, it could be a disaster real quick. So that's where having a flexible model around how they enroll and when they come is really important, because ultimately you're funded the same as a mainstream school. You've got your SRP, you might have some kids who are now on DI, all right? But really, you need to run on the bare bones. That's where it also is important to have partnerships, so you can have services come to work with those kids. You know, we used to often look at LV Flow where we would take enrolments throughout the year, knowing that come census date the year after, you front-ended it somewhat. You know, so you're knowing that, yes, we might have 30 kids that attend, but we know that census next year, that's what it's going to be. We've got funding for 18. It gradually goes up. I think LV Flow now has an enrolment well over 150 every year, so, which is a huge amount, but they're not always there the whole time. Now, that's probably not, it doesn't fit into exactly, well, certainly not the model of a mainstream school, but that's not what the kids need. If the kids can attend school all day, every day, and they're going well, that's the pathways model. They should be back in mainstream school. So I hope that answers it. It's great. I think the key, that really what I would say propped up both the settings that I established was the old PSD model, and really having some experts in there. I think having some people who understand DI now is equally as important, because the adjustments are there. It's based on the adjustments. I do think it's probably going to be a better model for our alternative settings.
Yeah, I thank you for that, and I agree 100%. I just know anecdotally that coming out of the community health sector a number of years ago, we ran an alternative setting based out of our local community health centre in partnership with the high school, and just seeing the difference of the way those young people felt and were supported in a different space to what they were used to in a school setting. Those relationships and partnerships with other organisations in your community, which I know you touched on quite a bit in your presentation, are gold if you can get them and to secure them and to have them long term.
Yeah. Cheers, Morris. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. That was really interesting. So thanks so much for that. And we wish you all the best. I know you've got to duck off somewhere else. So thank you for your time. I'm going to head over to South Australia now. And I can see the smile on Mark's face as his home state gets another crack at a presentation. I did like Mark's reference to Red Simons and the gong. I don't know how many people got that from many, many years ago, but well done, Mark, for that 1970s reference. But we'll hand over to Peter Shearer, who's from St Joseph's in Clare. Peter, I was just having a look at some of the stuff on your website, and I noticed that You've got, things like Harmony Day and Harmony Week coming up, when we're talking about engaging with your students and getting them to engage with their communities where they come from and celebrating that and supporting that. And I really liked some of the work you're doing in that space. So without further ado, Peter, I'll hand over to you, and looking forward to what you've got to share.
Yes, thanks for that. Mark asked me just to share some of the things we do about building community and working away. Brett's comment about knowing your community is probably pivotal to what all we did. And it's probably a mistake I made when I first got here. Just going through, I've just got to click on my screen here to share a couple of slides. Where are we? Whoop. How are we going there? Our school was a Josephite school, started in '69, and I was the first principal to come here that wasn't a nun, so it was a bit different for everyone. I've been in the same school for 22 years, had 172 kids when I got here, and now we've got 320. Our strength has always been building community and having a good community. But when I first got here, I found it really difficult to understand the community, because I didn't go through and work it out straight away. So Clare, South Australia, and all the South Australian schools are fairly different. We've been another 7 state for a long time, and then a little while ago, 2 or 3 years ago, South Australia got rid of the Year 7s, and as a result of that, all the schools are Arta 6, and some schools that didn't have pathways for Catholic education like ours, we got to go to Year 9. So that was something that's different. Did a bit of building, which was terrific, got all that done. And so that's the context of our school. And our part that I really struggled with to start off with was understanding one of our complexities. I think all schools got complexities, and ours is our catchment area. When you look here, this is actually to a scale map. And our kids come from wide and far. So we're actually 10 times the size of the Greater Adelaide. So if you put that into context, basically we've got people coming from 50k north, east, west and south. And when I got here, everyone loved St. Joseph's as a school, but weren't really buying into a lot of the things we were doing it. And it was probably by the time I got to the end of term 1, we actually realised that people were from their own small communities and were really parochial, really loved their small communities, and were really invested in there. So when I'm asking them to jump on board what we're doing in Clare, some people actually probably were a little bit anti-Clare because we were the bigger town. Clare's got a population of 4,500, whereas other small towns around it, have populations of 100, 200, 300. So when we're trying to build those type of things, I was probably a bit naive in that way and had to do some work, and as Brett said, had to get to know my community a little bit better. One of the things that sort of highlighted what we were doing, and was probably the shift that I'm probably proud of, was our involvement in Anzac Day. I'm a big believer in community. Clearly, that's why I've been in country schools for a long period, all my teaching career and all my principalship years. It's been in the country. I'm a strong believer in Anzac Day and like to have the kids involved with anything that's going to enhance community, engage community, support community. And we got our kids to come along to the Anzac Day service and really got parents to have a bit of buy-in with that. And up here in Clare, we probably had 200 people going to that Anzac Day. 20 years later, we probably have about 800. And I think it's a lot to do with the way our school supported and done that. But even then, this was a big learning experience with me. So we sort of laid the wreaths, got the kids involved and did a whole range of different things. But again, naively, I didn't realise that these other centres had their own Anzac Day ceremonies. And probably by not doing that, it put pressure on people to come and support what I was on about, and that was Clare. And by getting to know our communities better and acknowledging the smaller communities within the communities, we now have kids lay wreaths at about 8 different places on Anzac Day, and our school's represented there, and it's really well received and supported. a little photo here that I've just jumped. Here's one of my favourite ones of the thing. During the COVID years, we couldn't have Anzac Day services, and couldn't have gatherings, but we're able to actually, our kids really value Anzac Day and want to be involved, and that's them coming to gathering. We had the parents standing on the outside, all socially distanced, etc. But for me, what it means is that people really value what we're doing.
Peter, sorry, just wanted to jump in and just say that the slides aren't updating, so I'm not sure if it's your screen or our screen, but we're still on the first one, so I just wanted to check in with you with that because you were talking about some photos that haven't appeared.
Okay. Not sure how to go back to that one.
I think, Peter, if you just use the down arrow key, you should be able to move through the slides.
We don't use WebEx anymore, guys. We have Teams. So is that not clicking through?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet. I can also share it for you if you'd prefer.
Okay, if you can, sorry, because we, as I said, we don't use WebEx anymore. So that was okay.
That's great. Thank you.
I'll share it now.
Okay, do you want to just click on to about what is it, the 8th slide, which is location?
Yep, sure.
You got it there?
Yep, I'll just share it now.
Sorry, that sort of made it a bit jumbled. That what I'm talking about is not making sense.
There we go.
Okay, you can see that part there. That just signifies that's the Greater Adelaide down there in the blue, and there we are in Clare. And clearly, you've got lots of little towns in there, and our space just takes up 10 times the size of the Greater Adelaide. So that was my challenge to get to know that component there. Maddie, do you want to just click through a couple more so I can get to where I'm up to? Okay, that just parts there. That Anzac Day was just an example of the kids coming and gathering, which was a really significant time for us. If you just go to the next one, please, Maddie. Okay, with community, building community, obviously it's a passion of mine. It's something that I think we do all right here. But for me, going to, or probably I've been to about 3 or 4 sessions with Peter Kenyon from Bank of Ideas. And what I found with him, he's just got so many different ways to go through and look at celebrating the uniqueness of each community, engaging each community. He does little things about, the kids within a country town. What's 30 things you have to do, or 20 things you can do in the holidays in your town? What's 30 things you have to do before you get to 15 years of age? What's 50 things you have to do before you get to 18 years of age in your town? And it's just a way to really engage people in what they sometimes think isn't a really rich community, but when they go through and look at what they've got in there and work with it, it's fantastic. Another thing that I've used from his Bank of Ideas is to go through and just really work through who your people are in the community, what they've got to offer, what their skills are, what the natural resources are in the community. And we do a brainstorm at every staff meeting at the beginning of the year and go through and look at who are the people we actually get into our community to do a talk about something, whether it be the fireys, whether it be the doctor, whether it be someone that writes in a paper or whatever. I mean, every community's got the richness. And I suppose it's us just identifying them. And the big part that I've found about that is how much the people that are being identified actually really love it. And it actually gives them a real confidence and a spur on to know that they're actually, a bit of an inspiration to the kids in the community. So that's one that we do. The other part, it's called the Fathering Project. If you just go to the next slide, Maddie. The next one is the Fathering Project. And whilst it's about fathering, it's not about fathering, it's about just building better families and better communities. And you can substitute the word fathering to mothering, to grandparenting, a whole range of different things. And so from his project, we went through and did some things with Grandparents' Day, Mother's Day, and Father's Day, and we do that on rotation. We do one year A, B, and C. And we've had up to 300, 400 parents and grandparents at our school, you get the extended family. Obviously, we've got to be politically correct and also acknowledging kids that some they don't have grandparents, or they're estranged from their grandparents, or a whole range of different things. So we make sure we have significant others included in all those parts are there to ensure that part. And that just, again, builds the community, builds the strength of the community, makes the, we have to acknowledge that some parents had a terrible experience at school. Some grandparents had some terrible experiences at school, and then coming on to a community where their kids, and some of their parents are illiterate. They can't do the things that their kids or grandkids do. But if we have them on a site that has no judgment and really celebrates the school and learning, and they can go in and do some work and activities with the kids, they actually can break down the barriers that make schools actually a good place to be, and they're actually proud of them. If you welcome anyone to your school, they're actually going to have an affiliation and a bond and a strength with it. So we found that's really important. Got another slide there. We'll just go through. Just showing pictures. The next slide, Matt, if you can, is about how we just sort of celebrated. This is an old one, Dad say, because we actually missed 3 years of it with the COVID component. So that just showed how many people coming up. And what we found, again, with the planning it, we made sure we put the dates up about 2 months earlier so people can't not be there and use an excuse as time. So we go through all the blockers and worked out what could be issues and try to turn those around into positive ways that people can engage with the school. And to be honest, we had 98% of our families represented. And those ones that didn't, we make sure we knew who they were because we didn't want the kids to feel uncomfortable, and made sure we got the old surrogate grandparent or grandparents or dads or whatever like that. So for me, again, it's been knowing the community, knowing what our strengths are, knowing what our weaknesses are, and trying to identify those to make sure that we're building and maintaining community to the best we can. Big thing we're finding now, we're not getting parents on site to listen to reading or doing those things as much, but we've got lots of people in the community, like the grandparents, that are taking that role, because fortunately we've got lots of people that have got dual incomes. I say fortunately because some people don't have that luxury, but that just means they're not at school as often. So we're trying to work out how we actually can flip that around. So instead of mums reading or dads reading at school, we've got lots of grandparents and community people here now. Mark, I hope that sort of covers some of the things that you are after me to cover. As I said, the big part for me is knowing a community, using people like the Fathering Project, and looking through the banks of ideas, because those sort of people are just experts and they've got all the knowledge there. And if we can, I'm a great big borrower and stealer. So there you go.
Peter, thanks for that. And I realise that we've had some experience with you in the past, and it's fantastic that you share the things you've been through. Just a question around, you've got a suite and a range of programs that your school offers and engages with the community with, and obviously there's a lot more there. Do you find that having that is one of the great ways of connecting with potentially those kids that are at risk of disengagement, to offer them a whole range of different things that they can connect with, and that can be supportive in that space without actually highlighting that they're at risk?
Oh, I think so, and it's building that community, building that range of people to wrap around them. To the grandparent's going to do a hell of a lot better job than I am. The person that coaches a footy team or netball team is going to do a better job. They're going to associate better with those type of people, and it's amazing how some of the buddy systems that you do, where the year 5 or 6 kid can turn a kid's behaviour around or engage a child in year 1. Hell of a lot better than the teacher can, hell of a lot better than the parent can, hell of a lot better than the principal can. So by having a range of those strategies, I think you're right. Nothing's going to fit everyone. Everyone has different learning styles, and everybody probably has different social or emotional intelligence and engagement. So the more, you don't want to blanket and do too much. I think you can go that far, too far, and have it. What we do, we try to do well.
Yep. Thanks, Peter. And I just encourage people, if they want to find out more, to have a look at your website and stuff. There's a lot of great stuff there about the programs that you run and the work that you do in your local communities, and connecting your kids to their sense of community as well. So for that, and we wish you all the best.
Cheers, bud. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally today, but not last, of course, not least, we've got Liz Henderson from Schools Plus. And it's really exciting to have Liz with us today. Liz, I was doing a bit of reading on your website as well before I came on, and I couldn't help to be attracted to the work that the Making Space for STEM program. That was the one that struck out for me at Montello Primary School in Tasmania, and the amazing work that was happening in that space in engaging students. And I know that's one of the many things that Schools Plus has been working in and supporting. But you're going to tell us a bit more about your work and what you do and how you do it, and how people can get involved. So Liz, welcome, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Maurice, and thank you to everyone for giving me 10 minutes of your day. I appreciate how incredibly busy you all are. I'd just like to give you a little synopsis about the not-for-profit I work for and how we might be able to support your school. I'm just going to share my screen, or potentially not. Is that sharing?
Not yet.
Not yet. It's a shame.
I can share it if you'd like, Liz.
I had this down pat, Maddie, moments ago.
Yeah, you did.
I was going okay there, Maddie.
That's right. I can share it if you'd like.
No, I'm determined.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone. Sorry, I've got it.
There we go.
Here we go.
Sorry again. So who is Schools Plus? Schools Plus was established after the Gonski Review. One of the points that came out of the Gonski Review was that there was a place for philanthropic funding in our education system. So Schools Plus was seeded with funding from the government as a platform to attract donor dollars from the private sector. So it could be foundations, high net worth individuals, people who can't normally donate directly to schools. At Schools Plus, we're only allowed to fund schools that have an ICSIO ranking below 1,000. So that's how, broad brush strokes, we identify the schools we're allowed to fund. And that's what we are. We basically run an application round every year. This year it opens on the 5th of August and closes on the 9th of September. And schools are able to apply for funding. What that funding looks like is completely driven by the school, because as I've been hearing just then, it's the schools that know where the funding needs to go, what the most critical factor is in their school community that's going to make the biggest difference in student outcomes. So it was actually so satisfying to hear with the alternative settings. That's the kind of programs that we are able to fund. We can't compete with government funding. It has to be a project that would sit outside, like a school portable being built or anything of that magnitude. Generally, our funding is $30,000 a year for a single year project, or a cluster of schools we can also fund, which will obviously be up to $75,000. So if you were to get a group of schools together and you knew that literacy was the biggest issue, that cluster of schools could get together and apply for funding. But as we heard before, our projects are chosen on the most robust. So we have an education panel. Don't worry, it's not down to me. An education panel who chooses the most robust projects. And you're able to come to us and run your ideas past us, our education people, and to get the sort of good oil on what a good project looks like. And for us, it's a project that would last beyond that year. It would be a project that involves family engagement, community engagement, and it has investment from the school leadership. So that's the broad brushstrokes, what a project could look like. So I've said single year or multi-year. So we do multi-year now. We're getting a lot more interest in multi-year projects, not just from schools, but from donors as well. Donors appreciate that better outcomes come from longer term investment. It's much more helpful for schools to know that they've got 30 grand a year for 3 years than for just 1 year. The impact can be much greater. There's some stats on what we've been able to achieve to date. We have key focus areas, learning gaps. So that could be an early years literacy intervention project, for example, where they have professional development for teachers. We fund the teacher release component, the actual physical materials required for the literacy intervention. That could be a learning gaps project. Wellbeing, so it could be the Berry Street model, as we heard earlier, where we would fund the teacher release, the facilitator coming out for professional development, materials needed to implement the project. But of course, I think rural, regional and remote is one of our focus areas as well, which is appropriate, let's say. They're just some of our funders that we have on board at Schools Plus. Thought I might just give you some examples of projects I'm currently supporting in Victoria. Just want to feel a bit odd. I'm sort of speaking to my presentation. Wendouree Primary School, we're doing a single year project at the moment where they identified maths as their biggest issue in their school. The school would give us the information, the stats around where their school's sitting in as compared to a like school or national NAPLAN average or whatever to demonstrate the need. And in this case, the literacy lead applied for funding to us, and then they outlined how they were going about shifting the dial in changing numeracy outcomes within the school. So it was a maths online, it was a small group interventions, it was professional development, modelling lessons. As Brett said before, it's so important to get out there and see alternative settings, and that's the kind of thing we fund in this situation where, say, in a community of practice, we'd pay for teacher release so that teachers could look at other teachers' lessons or get together, because it is incredibly important to have that shared knowledge. Wallaroo Primary School's doing single year funding at the moment, and food security was identified as the biggest need in their school. So we're funding a Stephanie Alexander kitchen garden, and then the whole professional development around talking about nutrition and engaging families in being in the garden and being with their children in the garden. Somerville Secondary College is a single year literacy program for year 10. They're doing a phonics intervention piece where they're doing sounds right and reading instruction. They're doing small group literacy intervention. Labourtouche, they did a really successful numeracy project 2 years ago, and now they're doing a multi-year literacy project that over the 3 years they're focusing on foundation to year 3, then they're doing the whole school, and then they're going to look at developing a community practice in that area. So bringing other schools on the journey of literacy, improving literacy outcomes. So yeah, as I said, I'm the state manager for Victoria and Tasmania. We fund nationally. Our round for this year opens on the 5th of August and closes on the 9th of September. Please reach out if you're interested in taking this any further, and I can also put you in touch with our education team about discussing what project you might be interested in getting funded. I think that's it. I did see a question pop up mid-flight. Yes.
Are schools selected on a merit base nationally, or is the funding evenly distributed amongst the states and territories?
It's project merit based, so it's about which projects have the strongest student outcome potential according to our education team. Interestingly, we're quite heavily West Australian. We get quite a bit of project requests from Western Australia, but I'm on a bit of a rampage between the Victorian Principals Association, Tasmanian Principals Association, and you guys to divert funding to Victoria, because we have a massive regional focus.
Yeah.
And that alternative settings, it's just funny. You should put me in this little, at the end of alternative settings. We've funded skateboard making workshops as a way of luring students in, and that was in South Australia actually, where they'd get kids engaged in making skateboards, and then all of a sudden there's a bit of English, and then comes maths, and then bit by bit, just a way of getting them on site. But we've done a number of very successful alternative setting projects where the teachers could see the hook, the spark that they knew would get their students in and on, and it's just incredibly satisfying.
Yeah. I think it does all link in, as you were saying there, Liz, and I thank you for that presentation. I do encourage people to have a look at the Schools Plus website. There's a lot of information on there, and it's fantastic. And I was drawn to the Knowledge Hub with all the information that was on there. And do you just want to give us a quick snapshot of the Knowledge Hub and what's there? Because I found it fascinating. There's so much great information and case studies there.
Yeah, I think it's important to see the case studies, because I want to actually be able to get them at case studies a bit more out in newsletters, because it gives an idea. Otherwise, I find what we do a bit vague, because we can fund anything that the government would not otherwise fund. So our projects can be really broad reaching, which makes our evaluation team go a little bit nuts when we're trying to measure impact. But when you're talking about, like, we've got an early years literacy program in Dandenong where there are 5 kinders and 5 primary schools for the first time working together. They've unified the language they use. They get together fortnightly. It's the most ethnically diverse postcode in Australia. And they've managed to get these children's literacy levels up above national average. They have shared resources where they have a floating OT, a floating speechy, floating resources everyone can use. Family hubs within each school where families are encouraged to come in, learn English, take advantage of resources they may not be aware of with respect to food, access, that kind of thing. I guess that's the thing with the Knowledge Hub. It might help demystify what we fund, and anything's on the table as long as it's something the government wouldn't otherwise fund.
Yeah, and I do like those case studies, because often, people are starting to think about things that they need and projects and all sorts of things, and often these things have been done before and have been discussed before in slightly different circumstances. So being able to touch base with, these people have done this in their area, we just probably need to adapt it slightly and stuff. There's some great case studies on there. So as a big supporter of yours, I encourage people to have a look, because there's genuinely really interesting content. So thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for your time. It's greatly appreciated.
So thanks, Liz from Schools Plus, and obviously earlier on we heard from Brett out at Trafalgar and also Peter from St Joey's in Clare. That brings us pretty much to the end of our presentations, and on that note, formally thank everyone again, but hand over back to Mark, who will finalise things for us today.
Thank you, Morris. And before I promote next week and wrap up today, just quickly while we've got 2 minutes, in 2019, I was lucky enough to visit a bunch of schools investigating principal mental health. And I ended up in Peter Shearer's school. And I asked him how he looks after his mental health. And from another room, either his business manager or assistant principal yelled out, "He doesn't." And that's where I learned Peter works 12-hour days, often 7 till 7. But he does do something unique in his very small amount of spare time that many principals don't. So, Peter, what's your side business or hustle or hobby that you'd like to quickly share with us? And you're on mute.
I don't know. It's a hobby. It's a bit too carried away now. It's I run a vineyard and a wine label, so that's probably if you're going to work hard, you may as well drink hard. I think that might be an adage. I'm not sure if that's quite politically correct, but no, it's something that I love doing. It's growing up in the country, living in the country. Primary production is pretty important. So what else to produce rather than wine? So yeah, Waikari of Clare is the name. Yeah.
And do you find that's a nice release from your Monday to Friday work?
In some ways, it's another way to engage with parents, isn't it? Like if you're working and living in the country, so many people that do struggle on the land or do produce things, or it's another way to have a conversation. Not that you have to go and buy a vineyard to converse with people or anything like that. It's a far long bow to string, but I just love being outside. It's being in an office, being around staff, being around kids. None of the vines have argued back with me yet, so I'm waiting for that day that they do, and then I'm going to try strife.
Thanks, Peter. And my other lovely story you told me was when either one or a couple of your kids talked you into opening a cellar door on weekends, but promised that they would run it. And for the first few weeks, they kept having other things come up. So guess who was also running the cellar door in his spare time was Peter Shearer. So
it's called months now, mate, not weeks.
Thank you very much. Yes, so just to promote next week will be our last one for this series. It's around P12 schools or K12 schools as well here in Victoria, which in South Australia and other states are often known as area schools, and often in greater numbers in your larger states, your WAs, NT and South Australia. But here in Victoria, there are 48 recognised rural P12 schools. We're going to hear a little bit about the history of P12 in Victoria, about what makes a great P12 school. And then there are a group of 8 P12 leaders who've decided to form an alliance. So they will officially launch the alliance. And we're also going to hear from the newest P12 school, Orbost, which only opened its doors the first day of this year. So we're quickly going to hear from a few minutes from their principal as to how the year's gone so far in a brand new P12 school in the town of Orbost. So we look forward to that next week, and we hope to see as many of you as we can. I'll remind you all to do the survey. That's in the chat box. We thank you all for your attendance today. And those, I've seen a few regular faces who keep popping up, so really appreciate that. And all our speakers today. I know we've lost a couple, but we thank you all for the time and appreciate it. And my first job is comparing, and I finished 2 minutes early, so I'll give myself a gold star. Enjoy the afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.